So good.
Lancaster!
Welcome, goodies.
That's you.
I'm Jason Mundock. This is So Good Lancaster. So I learned something pretty interesting recently, and that's about Lancaster's history, and specifically about this period of time that's just a little over 100 years ago. Did you know that Lancaster was this wide open town for prostitution, for gambling, for even like unlicensed saloons?
No, I didn't know that bigger picture, but I did know that our town used to be a brothel.
This is Star Snyder. She's our member experience and media studio coordinator here at TCF. And yes, apparently there were brothels all the way up and down Water Street, from like south of King Street all the way up past Lemon.
Whoa, so I live like right there at that intersection of King and Water. And I knew that Water had a little bit of a seedy history, but I didn't know all those details.
Yes, that is like right in the heart of this area, this red light district we're talking about. So we sat down with Allison Kibler. She's the founder of the Lancaster Vice Project and a professor at Franklin and Marshall College. And she told us all about this time period that basically went from the late 1800s through the 1920s.
Law enforcement in Lancaster is they're doing very little about commercial sex in 1913. Lancaster is running as a wide open town for prostitution, drinking, and gambling, yep.
And it turns out there was a lot of beer being sold at these brothels by four main breweries here in Lancaster. And I had a chance to chat with Chad Ricker. He's been immersed in Lancaster's brewing scene for about 15 years, drawing inspiration from his family's deep-rooted connections here in Lancaster County because they owned one of those four breweries. And then came Prohibition in the 1920s, which obviously had a negative impact on Lancaster breweries.
I can't imagine having an honest vocation, which is my opinion of brewing, and to have it told that it's illegal, that you literally can't do it like it was gambling or prostitution or something like that. It was an honest trade that humans have been doing for millennia.
That's right. Monks used to brew beer. It got them through Lent. It had all their essential nutrients in it, and so they would just drink it for that entire time period.
That sounds amazing.
It is amazing. And yeah, so for these groups to come in and say it's morally corrupt when it essentially started with monks.
Well, Prohibition is in the rear view, and Lancaster now has over 30 breweries.
How exciting.
I know that you are a beer enthusiast here in Lancaster.
That is accurate. I feel so lucky that we have so many wonderful breweries, especially here in Lancaster City.
What's your favorite?
So my favorite of all time is definitely Our Town Brewery. They not only brew really delicious beer that you can tell that they love to brew, but they also do a lot with our community.
What exactly do they do for the community?
So they have a couple beers that they brew throughout the season that a majority of the profits of said brew goes to charity. So for example, they brew one during Pride Month. Called Pride Parade. It's a raspberry IPA. They source it out to other restaurants and bars too. So a portion of those proceeds from that particular beer does go to charity.
Oh, that's really fantastic. I didn't realize that about our town.
Yeah, so a couple of my favorite other spots to get beer are Springhouse, for example. They make really excellent sours there. They have one called Commander Salamander. That's my favorite.
Great name.
If you're interested in an IPA, I highly, highly recommend Truth Beer. They have a delicious one called Juice Carton that they always have on tap. It's a great one.
Truth.
If you want something a little more interesting, I highly recommend stopping over at Cartel. They have an English mild called London Fog, and it's exactly what you'd anticipate it being. It's delicious, it's flavorful, it's spiced just right, and the ABV is pretty low, so you can drink a couple of them and not feel too bad.
That's a lot of beer, and we're just scratching the surface.
There can never be too much beer in Lancaster.
Today on the program, we're talking about brothels and beer. It's the seedy history of Lancaster. Right here, right now. Let's go. So Good Lancaster is powered by the Candy Factory, also known as TCF, a co-working and social club in downtown Lancaster, Pennsylvania. ClubTCF.com. Check it out. It's time. This is So Good.
So good.
So Good Lancaster.
If I was going to define my field in a really narrow way, I would say I'm an American women's historian. So I specialize in kind of gender, and my time period is the turn of the 20th century.
This is Allison.
Hi, my name is Allison Kibler, and I'm the founder of the Lancaster Vice Project and a professor at Franklin and Marshall College.
Allison's fascination with Lancaster Vice began after a student accessed a collection of detailed notes from Lancaster history. The collection included fascinating notes from 4 investigators, part of a national organization based in New York City and Rhode Island, who spent a month in Lancaster in November 1913 documenting prostitution.
They take really meticulous notes. They type up their notes, and they have kind of an elaborate filing system. And basically, all of those notes have been saved, preserved at Lancaster History. Interestingly, there was half of them, for some reason, ended up at a library at Indiana University, but we've since kind of reunified the collection. But that's almost 1,000 pages of notes of people walking around undercover in the streets of Lancaster, pool halls, brothels, saloons, hotel lobbies, and they're talking to brothel keepers. Some of them are pretending that they're trying to buy into the business. So they're like, how much money do you make? How many, they call sex workers inmates. How many inmates are working here? So they're trying to kind of figure out how the business works. Anyway, those notes have survived, and it's just an incredible resource. And I'd say the project is basically driven by that, and driven by my sense that it is almost an endless supply of fascinating stories of primarily like working class Lancastrians.
Allison points out that while the investigators worked closely with police, Lancaster's law enforcement did very little to address commercial sex at the time.
Law enforcement in Lancaster they're doing very little about commercial sex in 1913. Lancaster is running as a wide open town for prostitution, drinking, and gambling. Yep. There's a corrupt city administration. It's running as a machine. They're taking all kinds of kickbacks. Police are appointed by the mayor, so there's not kind of civil service jobs as we would think about it today. Like the tax collector is an appointed position. So just think of like lots of like corruption.
Gotcha. So we're talking specifically about 1913.
That's when the investigation is, yeah.
Can you give me a time range of this way that Lancaster was that you're talking about?
Definitely from the late 19th century through the 1920s.
Okay.
I mean, probably like Prohibition disrupts some of it, and changes things. But in the 1890s, there's evidence of one really aggressive judge who tries to shut down some brothels, and I think he's basically thwarted because it's still like a thriving, open industry. I wouldn't even call it an open secret. It is not a secret.
It's just the way it was.
It's just the way it was. Like there's the biggest red light district runs along Water Street, but that is by far, it is not the only district. It's just the biggest. It was just the biggest. So there's, brothels throughout the city. There's a gambling game right across the street from the mayor's office on King Street. You could find, unlicensed saloons and all kinds of, whatever vice you might have wanted to seek getting off the train, which was at the corner of Queen and Chestnut was the big train station. Lots of travelers, lots of outsiders who would, stop into the big hotels on Queen Street and ask any bellboy, any not a chambermaid, you might not ask her, but you'd ask a bellboy, where should I go? And he'd tell you.
This type of behavior is illegal. Allison was sure to clarify that with us. However, enforcement was pretty inconsistent. People were sometimes arrested for running disorderly houses, which are places with loud parties, unlicensed drinking, or commercial sex, or body houses, also known as brothels. But most cases ended with fines instead of jail time.
Hardly anyone goes to jail. I feel like that's kind of think of getting arrested as part of the system of bribery. Like you're going to pay a fine. Sometimes you have to say, "Oh, I'm not going to go back to my house. I won't run my house anymore." Might not be. It's probably going to be a lie, but you leave, you pay your fine, and you go back to your business.
Just a way to fund.
It's a way to like raise some funds, right?
Yeah.
Right.
And I would imagine if you cross the leadership in some way.
Yes.
Right.
And some of that is hard to trace. Like there are some women who get in trouble and seem to get, unusually long sentences, and I'm like, why? I wonder why they got
right.
in. And it must be something like that. Like they crossed somebody, they made some promises they didn't keep to some city official, something like that. But it's hard to retrace exactly what happens there.
What really set Lancaster apart in the early 1900s was its location. The constant flow of travelers may have made it a go-to spot for certain activities, even if there isn't solid evidence of its reputation outside of the area.
Like the fanciest brothel in Lancaster is on the corner of Prince and Walnut, where our town brewery is today. It's not the same building, but it's the same address. And when the investigators go there, they say, oh, this really is comparable to like the finest houses in New York City. So there's definitely a lot of comparison with how commercial sex is working in Lancaster with how it works in bigger cities. So I think it is kind of a destination. You hear a lot about like traveling salesmen. People can come from bigger cities, but they're also coming from the surrounding areas. They're taking those trolleys into the center city, to the center of Lancaster. So there's lots of different kinds of travelers who'd be coming through Lancaster. The other thing to note about why Lancaster is a big town for vice is it has a significant German immigrant population. Those German immigrants run the breweries in town. Lancaster's a big brewing town. It's known as Little Munich for a while.
Is that right?
Yeah. 4 major breweries. All of them survived Prohibition and are basically put out of business by the national breweries after that. But brewers like brothels, basically. They sell a lot of beer in brothels. Cases and cases of beer get delivered like through the side doors of these brothels. So I think the fact that Lancaster is a big brewery town means it's also like those business interests are in favor of vice. I mean, they don't come right out and say it publicly,
Of course.
but they're not really lobbying to, shut down brothels.
We'll circle back to the brewing scene in Lancaster during the 1900s later in this episode. Outside of just knowing everything there is to know about the Lancaster Vice period, Allison also has a podcast.
So the Lancaster Vice Files podcast, and that really tries to draw out the first part of the episode is really what you publicly know about a person from newspaper accounts or like census data. And then the second part of each episode is what is revealed in those secret or unpublished papers from the Vice investigators. That's the basic structure. I am trying to keep going, and I have 2 more episodes that are about to be, published. And they are about a toddler who is raised in a brothel. And that's a 2-part episode. Part 1 has been recorded, and part 2, I'm waiting to get the recording done, but then it'll be out. It's just a fascinating story about these investigators who go to a brothel on West Lemon Street and find a 2-year-old in the brothel.
Wow.
Very well cared for. She collects nickels and dimes. She's like well dressed. Some older children seem to be her playmates in the brothel. She also drinks whiskey from a shot glass. She swears. And she does a little kind of like, they call it a goo-goo eye dance. So you might say, that seems like kind of a dangerous situation for a toddler. But we've actually been able to follow her life. And she's reunited with her family and has kind of a secure future.
Allison also does Lancaster Vice walking tours, which will return in the spring of this year. It begins at the Welcome Center. That's formerly the mayor's office and loops through downtown, ending along Water Street.
We basically walk through the area that was kind of Lancaster nightlife because that's kind of the base, the infrastructure of Vice. You have to have all these settings where like young people, strangers are going to meet people in unsupervised settings. You got to be going out at night. And then we end the tour in the former red light district on Water Street. So it's basically walking a pretty big, not that big, but walking a loop around downtown.
You can dive deeper into Lancaster's fascinating history by checking out Allison's website, lancastervice.com. Follow them on Instagram @LankVice. Join their immersive walking tours or stream their podcast, The Lancaster Vice Files, available wherever you listen to podcasts. What's your favorite beer that's brewed in Lancaster County?
I enjoy a Hop Hog IPA.
Blueberry Trail from LBC.
I love Brains from Springhouse.
Mad Chef, but I don't have a specific one. I just really like Mad Chef.
Cartel has a great selection of beers.
I have a Lancaster County beer that was discontinued that I miss very much called Lexicon Devil, which was like this hoppy grapefruit pale ale that I dream about still.
If you have workplace flexibility and can work from anywhere, you probably know how lonely it can get working all day, every day in the same building where you sleep, i.e., your house. TCF Co-working and Social Club in Lancaster is the solution. Get out of the house, work around other humans in real life, and get social with a ton of clubs, activities, and events. TCF offers community, full-time, and private office memberships and day passes if you're just passing through town. Check out clubtcf.com, book a tour, and get plugged in.
So I was born and raised here. I'm actually a sixth generation
Lancastrian.
Is that where we are?
I think we're Lancastrians.
Castrians, okay.
This is Chad.
My name is Chad Ricker, and I've been in the local beer scene for 15 years.
Chad's journey to becoming a brewer is deeply influenced by his family history and a love for local heritage.
I always wanted to be a brewer. The brewery that my family had from the 1880s to the 1920s, 1930s was on the paternal side. So my paternal grandfather died when I was young. I was in first or second grade. So I don't really have many memories of him, but I was really close to my paternal grandmother, who lived to be 94. So we were really close, and she would always have the grandkids come over for, to have like a sleepover. And it was usually just, she'd rotate. So she'd pick a grandkid, you'd come, you'd hang out with her. And it usually involved going to breakfast the next day. I don't know what the other grandkids did, but one of my favorite things to do was we would drive around Lancaster, and she would just tell me all about the local history. It just when it pertained to our family. So she would say, this is Cabbage Hill. This is where I grew up. This is where your grandfather, my husband, grew up. This is our church, St. Joe's Catholic Church. And she would even take me to like parking lots, and she would say, this is where your great-grandfather's house was, and stuff like that. And I just soaked it up. I loved it.
Chad's brewing journey began with passion and determination. After completing vocational training through the American Brewers Guild, he secured an internship at Iron Hill Brewery right here in Lancaster. Despite no promise of a job, his hard work earned him a brewing position, where he built his career for over 5 years. Now, after nearly a decade at Columbia Kettle Works, Chad has revived his family's brewing tradition, following in the footsteps of his great-great-grandfather, Frank Wurtenberg.
I'm here because of Frank Wurtenberg, who immigrated here. He was born in 1840, and he actually immigrated here in 1863, which I always thought was fascinating. To go to a country in the midst of like a civil war,
right?
I can't imagine what he was leaving, and I assume he knew. So he came here, and he came from a wine region of Germany, but he came as a brewer. And if you look at the census records, you can see that he always listed that as his vocation. He worked for several local breweries before he ended up starting his own. And the brewery that we started in the 1880s was a brewery previous on that location. So he ended up just taking over ownership of a brewery that was already there and then made it his own. Frank is not buried in Lancaster. After his son took over management of the brewery, he went back to Germany. He was like super political, and he got involved in the Prussian politics that was going on there, and he's buried in Germany. But everybody else is buried at St. Joe's Cemetery out in Bousman. So my great-great-grandfather then took over ownership, and he was the one who saw it through World War I and then with Prohibition.
Chad shared that his family brewery, the Ricker Star Brewery, focused on staple beers rather than the wide variety seen in modern breweries. They distributed their beers in barrels to local saloons and regional outlets. Located on King Street in Lancaster, the brewery operated alongside its flagship tap room, the Blue Star Tavern, which featured a spacious bar on the ground floor and offices upstairs.
They had a Pilsner, they had a Schwarzbier, which was like a dark German lager. They had what they called a Vienna, which was like an amber lager. And then they did a pale ale for the British interest.
Chad explained how breweries in the late 19th and early 20th centuries thrived due to innovations from the Industrial Revolution, such as modern refrigeration and steam heating. These advancements transformed brewing from a seasonal activity to a year-round industry. Lancaster's Ricker Star Brewing, one of the largest regional breweries at the time, distributed beer as far as New York City, Baltimore, and Philadelphia. However, Prohibition in the 1920s had a devastating impact.
They tried to have a go of it illegally and they tried to bootleg. There's a famous story where the Ricker Brewery employed these guys to run the beer line in the sewer so that they could take the beer still brewed at the brewery illegally, but then bottle it off premises and use the rail network to get it illegally distributed. And their downfall was that one of the beer hoses got too close to a hot pipe coming out of a laundromat. And apparently it blew up the beer line, and they got in trouble because there's beer foaming up out of the sewer.
That's great.
Yeah.
So they tried it for a while and just couldn't make it, I would assume.
Right. Yeah. I mean, what they were doing was ultimately illegal, but it had to have been heartbreaking because I can't imagine having an honest vocation, which is my opinion of brewing, and to have it told that it's illegal, that you literally can't do it like it was gambling or prostitution or something like that. It was an honest trade that humans have been doing for millennia.
Right.
And they were proud. Like they weren't. They had American flags all over the brewery. When they came, they sold their soul to America, and they gave it everything. And so, if you look at old photographs of the brewery, you see American flags everywhere. You see their patriotism. You saw their devotion to the country. They wanted America to succeed. So it had to have been gut-wrenching.
Our town has these really good doubles and German brews that are really, really fantastic, and all their stuff's real seasonal. So,
Springhouse, the mango IPA.
Our town's coffee stout is pretty good. It comes in like a little bottle.
We like Matt Schaff Brewery.
Moo Duck is in E-Town, Elizabethtown. That's quite good.
I think the Libation Double IPA from St. Boniface is my favorite Lancaster. Definitely my favorite Lancaster IPA. Probably my favorite Lancaster brewed beer ever.
Are you looking for the perfect space for your next meeting, media project, or private event? Well, TCF has you covered. Our conference rooms are perfect for meetings with your team or your clients. Our media studio can accommodate photography, audio, and video production. And our 6th-floor venue has everything you need to throw an unforgettable private party or retreat. Book now at lancastervenue.com and take your next event to the next level. Years later, and Chad is beyond proud to be following in his family's footsteps.
I just want to say, I just feel so blessed that I was able to stay in Lancaster. So I chose to be a brewer, not because I had any job lined up, but I just knew there was something I wanted to do. And I love living in Lancaster, and I've always wanted to, stay there. My family's always been here, but I was prepared to leave if I had to. So I felt very fortunate that I was able to find a brewing job in Lancaster and be able to stay. And I don't know, you just see it. You just see it in the places we live. Like, it's just, there's a lot of passion. There's a lot of people who are just so happy living here. And I see it in my son, who's 14, who's already declared that he's taking our house, kicking us out. And yeah, so I guess I'll have to find somewhere to live.
Yeah, you got to get on that, because 14's not too far away from when he would be
taking the keys and kicking
evacuating
me out.
you, essentially.
Right, yeah, evicting me from my own home.
Chad's love for brewing is deeply tied to his family's rich history. But it's his own passion and skill that have brought their legacy into the modern era. By immersing himself in Lancaster's brewing community, he's found a way to bridge the past and the present. Through his role at Columbia Kettleworks, Chad continues to leave his mark on Lancaster's thriving beer culture, honoring his heritage while forging his own path. A huge thank you to Allison and Chad for joining us at the So Good Media Studio. Lancaster is full of incredible stories, from Chad bringing his family's brewing tradition back to life at Columbia Kettleworks to Allison uncovering the city's hidden history through Lancaster Vice. There's always more to learn and appreciate about this unique county. Hey goodies, we love hearing from you. Let's reach into the goodie bag and hear what you have to say. Soccer fans, mark your calendars. The legendary voice of soccer, JP Della Camara, is coming to Lancaster County on February 1st for the Kicking It Forward Gala. He's bringing his stories of soccer's evolution in the U.S. to Lancaster. You can learn more about the event by visiting lancasterinferno.com. And our friend Raz let us know that the Lancaster Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders are hosting a Lunar New Year Festival on February 2nd from 11 a.m. to 3 p.m. This celebration is happening at Ool Plaza and Binns Park, and admission is completely free. There will be live cultural performances, Asian food vendors, a dumpling eating contest, and more. Be sure to check that out. Want to throw your thoughts into the goodie bag? Let us know what you think of today's episode, or if you have any fun announcements or events you'd like us to share on the show, we're all ears. You can head over to sogoodlancaster.com and submit your comments, or leave a comment on our episode post on Reddit. We post each episode in the Lancaster subreddit. Your thoughts and announcements could be featured in an upcoming episode of So Good Lancaster. Well, that's it for today. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll catch you next time. In the meantime, stay good, Lancaster. Stay good. So Good Lancaster is produced at So Good Media in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. Our production staff is Ann Kirby, Georgia Hall, and Star Snyder, and I do a few things here and there as well. Find us online at sogoodlancaster.com and follow us on all the socials. Have any comments, questions, or want to learn more about how So Good Media can help you with your podcast and media productions? Drop us a line at hello@sogoodmedia.studio.